Knavish. Hey.
I would just like to say, I really despise being right. Kung Fu Panda 4 has finally been unleashed onto the world, and I was so excited to see it. I took a very brief trip to the United States so I could see the film in all its glory. And I gotta say, there were certainly some interesting story shakeups in this one, though I still don't understand what a slotflight.net is. Real talk though, DreamWorks, can you stop making me wait an ungodly amount of time to see your films legally? Like, come on, I'm already British, I need to choose a singular struggle here. But yeah, Kung Fu Panda 4 is a film that DreamWorks forgot existed until like 2 weeks ago when they realized they should probably market their movies so they don't end up with a Ruby Gilman situation again. And the conversation surrounding this film from announcement to release has been strikingly split. And for good reason too. While it is true there are 6 Kung Fu Panda movies planned out, Jesus, most people accepted Kung Fu Panda 3 as the natural conclusion to a trilogy. And to Panda 3's credit, while it is seen as the weakest in the franchise, well, not anymore, but I'm getting ahead of myself, most people accept it as a satisfying conclusion, and the film overall felt pretty darn conclusive. So the announcement of a 4th Kung Fu Panda movie, while not exactly unwelcome given it's one of DreamWorks' most iconic and beloved franchises, definitely left a lot of people rightfully skeptical. And that skepticism only strengthened as more details about the film came out, along with a frankly hilarious amount of leaks. Again, as I mentioned in my last video talking about this movie, the unfinished placeholder trailers for Kung Fu Panda 4 were just dumped into my Discord server, which then started a domino effect of them being spread across the entire internet. Every time I walk outside, I fear that I'm gonna get sniped by one of DreamWorks' f***ing ninjas. These trailers included unfinished animation, storyboards, plot details, the placeholder music with a Drake song. It was terrifying. Obviously, I can't show any of the leaked stuff because DreamWorks would likely orbital strike my home. It definitely made me incredibly skeptical of the film, and I can't say it made me very excited. And when the trailer officially dropped, I was even less convinced because it included nearly every leaked scene I was already unconvinced by, along with some new scenes that started to make me worry a little. Despite this 4th film being planned for a while, it really felt like an unnecessary sequel on pretty much every level to me. From the new villain looking very uninspired to the possible regression of Poe's character arc, the complete absence of the Furious 5, Aquafina, I was not very hopeful. My bare minimum expectation for this movie was that it would be a solid and entertaining installment of the franchise that just kinda went through the motions without the maturity or depth of its predecessors. And now that I've seen the movie through entirely legal means, I promise, I'm honestly shocked at how mid the film is. If I had to describe it, Kung Fu Panda 4 feels like a first draft movie on autopilot. I cannot begin to describe how disappointing this movie was, but I'm gonna try. Also, later on in the video there will be spoilers mentioned, and I'll put up a disclaimer when the time comes, because there are some major problems with this movie that I cannot get into without spoiling it, especially when it comes to this film's ending and how genuinely awful it is. So for starters, let's go over the obvious things first, superficial stuff along with some actual concerns a lot of people had. Firstly, the big question. Is Aquafina annoying in this movie?
Remember my song in the swamp?
Shut the fuck up. Yes, she is still playing the exact same character she keeps getting typecast as. Admittedly, this is not her most infuriating role. You can thank this movie not having musical numbers for that. But overall, I thought this was important to address, just so people looking for an Aquafina trigger warning could be put at ease. Now, the soundtrack of this movie, banger. Actually, so goated. All of the Kung Fu Panda films have fantastic soundtracks, and this movie really is no exception. It's just that unlike the previous films, the soundtrack for this one is its best quality. Now, animation-wise, this movie is about on par with Kung Fu Panda 3, so there really hasn't been much change here. Overall, the film just looks fine from an animation standpoint. The lighting across the entire film is gorgeous, I'll give it that. But going off of art direction, it's nowhere near as striking as the previous films. This was a concern I had with the trailer because a lot of the new characters did not fit the art style of Kung Fu Panda very well. And overall, despite the animation quality being on par, there's something about the film that feels far more sanitized from a visual standpoint. Okay, now onto the actually important stuff. Was Kung Fu Panda 4 a necessary sequel? I don't think so. Like, at all. Did it at least try anything new that I like on a conceptual level? Kinda? But before that, I gotta get this off my chest. This movie is fast. Like cars, not that car, this car. Kung Fu Panda 4's pacing is breakneck. You would not believe how insanely fast this movie plays out. It's like watching a movie that is perpetually stuck at 2 times speed. When the movie got to the 20-minute mark, it genuinely felt like I had been sitting there for a good 40 minutes because of how hilariously inept the pacing is. From the minute the movie begins, it is determined to fry your cerebral cortex. It is bizarre. I obviously can't use examples from the legally sampled clips I have because I'm already in hot water with DreamWorks as it stands, but the movie continuously jumps from one scene to the next, not giving any character moment of the few there actually are, and story reveal any time to breathe. It's like the cinematic equivalent of waterboarding. We had to keep playing back some scenes because we just had no fucking idea what was happening half the time. It all goes by so quickly that your brain can barely register what's happening. It's like watching an officially licensed Kung Fu Panda content farm video on YouTube Kids where Jack Black sings "Baby One More Time" at the end. And what's more shocking about this is that Kung Fu Panda 4 is the shortest film in the franchise, clocking in at an hour and 20 minutes. There's enough plot and interesting ideas here that could easily be played out in a movie that has an extra 15 or even 20 minutes added onto its runtime. Regardless of some of the ideas here being genuinely interesting or even good on paper, none of it is done any justice or is given any time to be fleshed out. And this is the movie's largest problem. The pacing is horrendous. There's a big difference between having a fast-paced movie and a fast-paced movie that twists the viewer's neck 180 degrees every time the scene changes. But even disregarding the poor pacing, there is so much about this movie that feels incredibly off compared to the first three. For starters, everyone's concerns about the Furious 5 being gone were completely founded because they are nowhere to be found in this movie until the credits. Not a mid-credits scene, they show up for the credits. Lord have mercy, my goats are washed. Within the first 5 minutes of the film, they have a 10-minute sequence explaining that the Furious 5 are all out doing their own things. And it is such a fast and confusing scene. Truthfully, I have no idea why the 5 are just completely absent from this movie, especially when the director, Mike Mitchell, basically lied through his teeth and said that not only were the 5 definitely going to be in the film, but that the film would also bring back every single character from the previous movies. This is a very misleading statement because while yes, everyone does return, the movie doesn't actually do anything with them. A huge part of this movie's marketing came from the idea of Po fighting all of his previous foes, who were in fact just the new villain, the Chameleon, in disguise. But that never happens. Tai Lung at least gets actual dialogue, but Shen and Kai don't even speak. And there's never any moment where Po genuinely believes he's fighting his old enemies or whatnot. He finds out about the Chameleon at the start of the movie. It's only when Po and the Chameleon first fight that she turns into Tai Lung, Shen, and Kai. But they are only brief transformations. This movie's marketing is incredibly misleading and it removes a large part of my interest in the film's story, not helped by how much of a wet napkin the new villain actually is. I was skeptical about the Chameleon from the beginning, and can I just say that for a franchise that is renowned for having some utterly fantastic villains, the Chameleon is not only just a disappointment, she is a f*** up of biblical proportions. In the previous movies, you get the villain's deal and their motivations immediately. You're shown how badass they are, what they're capable of, they have an all-consuming presence on screen, they get shit done. The Chameleon? No sauce. None. Her entire gimmick is transforming into anything she wants, but unlike how the trailer suggested the film would play out, she doesn't have any unique powers, she just transforms into stuff. It's only later in the film do you actually get the scene where she steals the kung fu of everyone trapped in the spirit realm. It would have been far better if she had some new way of going into the spirit realm from the very beginning of the film, as opposed to needing Oogway's staff. If you switch this scene with Tai Lung getting his power stolen and you put it at the start of the film, this not only establishes the Chameleon as a genuine threat, it also actually displays how terrifying her powers are. Obviously, the script would need to be rewritten, but this is a far better and more effective opening scene than the one we got, and it would lead to the Chameleon actually having a commanding screen presence, because otherwise, she's just a pathetic fraud with no menace whatsoever. The scariest thing she does is kick someone down a flight of stairs after turning into an elephant. Compare that to Tai Lung's prison break, Shen straight up killing Master Rhino. Hell, even Kai had a fantastic opening by defeating Master Oogway and every other kung fu master in the spirit realm and stealing their chi. The Chameleon is such a lame villain with a ton of potential that is never tapped into, especially when you realize how f***ing easy she goes down. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Po's usage of the staff throughout the whole movie is insanely frustrating. He never uses it, and the only time he does use it until the very end of the film is during a bar fight with a bunch of nobodies, even though, as shown by the finale, the Chameleon goes down in 2 hits from the staff, and yet Po never uses it until the plot just demands that he does. This not only shows us how much of a fraud-ass bitch the Chameleon is, it's also just horrible writing. This thing is so overpowered that the film just constantly forgets that Po can use it until they have to wrap up the story. Genuinely, what is the point of the Chameleon if they go down in 2 hits to a weapon Po has had from the end of the last movie? What is going on? Did the writers fall asleep? The film seems to be prioritizing constant jokes as opposed to actual storytelling, which just doesn't work with Kung Fu Panda. There's none of the emotional sincerity and maturity that defined the previous films. It's a movie designed purely for kids that ignores the appeal the franchise had towards older audiences and has very little respect for what came before. I mean, there's a whole subplot involving Po's dads going out to find him for some reason, and it's such pointless garbage because they don't do anything meaningful over the course of the film. You can remove them and the events of the movie play out the exact same way. I have no idea why they are here. Their scenes together are not funny. I don't get what the point is. This is precious time that could be spent fleshing out the other parts of the film that desperately need some extra impact. Now, conceptually, I do like what's on display here. The whole plot of the film revolves around Po having to find a successor that he can train to become the next Dragon Warrior, and trying to embrace this inevitable change in his life when he's not ready for it. Mike Mitchell did state in interviews that Kung Fu Panda 4 is sort of a love letter to the first movie, and you can tell just with how many parallels there are. And I like this idea in concept. Po's journey began by being thrust into a role he was not ready for, and him struggling to let go of that role is an interesting idea. And Po being a teacher to train the next Dragon Warrior is absolutely something I can get down with. But as with all things, the problem lies in its execution. Kung Fu Panda 4 has Po clinging on to being the Dragon Warrior and really struggling to find his inner peace. In general, the way this film handles Po's character arc is really disappointing and flies in the face of the previous two movies. I'm sort of going to repeat what I said in my trailer analysis video here because I was pretty much right on the money with this. Po's whole arc in Kung Fu Panda 2 is about overcoming his childhood trauma, the loss of his parents, and the attempted genocide of his people by Lord Shen, finding his own inner peace. The finale of Kung Fu Panda 2 is an emotionally powerful conclusion and led to Po growing as a character, healing from his trauma and not letting the past define him and distract him from the present. Po's arc is what made that finale so satisfying, and it's a big reason why Kung Fu Panda 2 is commonly seen as the best film in the franchise. It's just peak fiction. Po struggling to find his inner peace, something so important to him in the second movie, and having it played out as a joke really doesn't sit right with me. And his whole spiel about how the Dragon Warrior is who he really is really doesn't feel right. Kung Fu Panda 3 is generally kind of forgotten about in this movie. Like at pretty much every turn, it acts like the third film just didn't happen. Aside from bringing back Po's dad, Po's entire conflict in that film stems from him having an identity crisis brought along from him being given a new role as a teacher to the Furious Five, along with how he feels regarding his adoptive and biological dads. And you want to know what conclusion he came to?
Am I the son of a panda? The son of a goose? A student? A teacher? Turns out, I'm all of them.
Then we snap back to Kung Fu Panda 4, and it's like I'm watching a version of Po who hasn't progressed since the first movie. Someone who lacks the maturity and depth of a character who had a perfect arc spanning 3 entire movies. Someone who hasn't faced his trauma and healed from it and found their inner peace. Someone who doesn't know who they are or where they belong in the world despite already finding the answer. I'm overall left incredibly disappointed with where this movie takes the series and handles its characters. Zen, the new character, is nothing to write home about, just Aquafina typecasted garbage. And look, is it really a spoiler to say that she's going to be the next Dragon Warrior? Like, should I really care about saying that? It's so obvious. From the film's plot synopsis to her constantly being tied to Po, to the parallels between Po and Shifu, you can see this coming a mile away, and I would have hoped there would be some moment where I can genuinely feel like these characters have developed a strong enough bond to justify such a choice. But because of this movie's insane pacing, no scene between them has any impact. I don't feel I should care at all about anything going on between them. Like, this is the problem. Kung Fu Panda 4 fails to make you care about the story and the characters within. It is a fast-paced, colorful kids movie that cranks out 1,000 jokes per scene with a staggering number of misses I might add, and seems to just disregard the core appeal of the franchise and what made it work in the first place. I'm not saying this is an awful movie. I've seen worse, no doubt, but Kung Fu Panda 4 is a DreamWorks movie on autopilot. I do not believe this movie was made in good faith or as part of a plan. It is so ungodly messy that I just refuse to believe it. There were 6 films planned for this franchise, but no one actually wants to acknowledge why it possibly took them this long to finally make another installment, and that's because I genuinely believe they were content with 3 being the conclusion. 4 does nothing remotely interesting enough to justify its existence, and while it isn't a total disaster, it is a mind-boggling disappointment on almost every level. DreamWorks, I sure hope that cool-looking robot movie of yours is a slam dunk, because you guys are not doing too hot this year, and this is coming from someone who knows that inconsistency is part of DreamWorks' charm. Anyway, that's all for now. Play Yakuza or something.